Ambassador stood alone in the center of the greatest room in the known galaxy. The Galactic Council chamber stretched upward for what seemed like forever, its walls made of living crystal that pulsed with soft light. 12 platforms floated in a circle around her, and on each platform sat a representative of the oldest species in the universe. She was small, she knew this. Humans had only traveled among the stars for 83 years. Some of the beings watching her had existed for longer than Earth itself. The High Arbiter spoke first. His name was, and his body was made entirely of blue crystal that chimed softly when he moved. He was 6,000 years old, and he had seen 17 civilizations die. Ambassador, he said, his voice like wind through glass, the Council has reached its decision regarding your. Kept her hands steady at her sides. She had practiced this moment 100 times in the mirror. She would not shake. She would not cry. Whatever came next, she would face it like the billions of people counting on her. The void swarm will reach your solar system in 72 of your hours, continued. There is no known defense. There is no weapon that can stop it. In the 100,000 years since the Council was formed, we have watched the swarm consume 17 inhabited worlds. We have tried everything. We have failed every time. A murmur passed through the chamber. The delegate, a creature of shifting purple light, pulsed with what might have been sadness. The lithoids, beings of ancient stone, sat perfectly still. Our protocol is clear, said. We will evacuate as many of your people as our ships can carry. Based on current capacity, we estimate 50,000 humans can be saved. They will be given a new home on the colony world of Threshold. Your species will survive, Ambassador, in some small way. 50,000 out of 8 billion. Felt the number hit her like a physical blow. 50,000 was nothing. It was a rounding error. It was a genetic archive, a museum piece, a footnote in galactic history that would read, humans existed briefly, were destroyed by the swarm like so many others. She thought of her mother in Santiago, who still grew tomatoes in her backyard. She thought of her nephew in Boston, who had just learned to ride a bicycle. She thought of the street vendor in Mumbai who had given her free chai when she was a broke graduate student, and the old man in Tokyo who fed pigeons in the park every morning, and the children everywhere who had never done anything wrong except be born on a planet that was about to die. No, she said. The chamber went silent. I'm sorry, leaned forward, his crystal body chiming with surprise. I said no. We do not accept evacuation. We do not accept 50,000. We do not accept the death of our world. The delegate flickered rapidly. Ambassador, you misunderstand. This is not a negotiation. The swarm cannot be stopped. This is simply the reality of the universe. Then we will change reality. Now the sounds began. The emitted sharp, discordant chimes that recognized as laughter. The pulsed with bright bursts of light. Even the ancient lithoids made a grinding sound deep in their stone bodies. They were all laughing at her. 12 species, some older than human civilization by a factor of 1,000, laughing at the small creature who dared to challenge the laws of the cosmos. Waited. When the laughter faded, she spoke again. How long until the swarm enters our system? Tilted his crystalline head. I told you, 72 hours. Then give us 24. 24 hours to do what? To solve the problem. The laughter returned, louder this time. A delegate made a sound like breaking glass. Solve it. Little human, we have studied the swarm for 100. Our greatest minds, our most advanced technologies, our combined wisdom of 1,000 generations. We cannot solve it. And you believe your species, your infant species that has barely learned to walk among the stars, can succeed where we have failed. In a single day. Yes, said simply. The delegate shook with amusement. And what makes you so certain? Looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes or sensors or energy patterns of each species in turn. Because you have been running from this thing for 100,000 years. You have been so busy running that you never stop to actually look at it, to understand it, to ask why it exists and what it wants. It wants to consume, the said. It wants to destroy. It is darkness itself. Maybe, or maybe that's just what you assume because you've never tried anything else. Took a breath. Humans are not like you. We are young. We are small. We are fragile. We die easily and we don't live very long. But we have one quality that has brought us from caves to the stars in the blink of a cosmic eye. And what is that? Asked quietly. Unlike the others, he was not laughing. He was watching her with something that looked almost like curiosity. We don't know when to quit, said. We look at impossible things and we say, yes, but have we tried? We are too stupid, too stubborn, too desperate to accept that anything is truly hopeless. And when our backs are against the wall, when everything is on the line, when we have nothing left to lose, she smiled, and there was no fear in it. That's when we're at our best. The chamber was quiet now. Stood slowly, his crystal form catching the light. The council will deliberate. The deliberation took 11 minutes. When the High Arbiter returned to his platform, his voice was heavy. Against the advice of my colleagues, I am granting your request, Ambassador. You have 24 of your hours. After that, the evacuation will proceed regardless of your wishes. He paused. I do not expect you to succeed, but I find myself curious. Bowed her head. Thank you, Arbiter. As she turned to leave, his voice followed her. Ambassador, why 24 hours? Why not 72? She looked back at him. Because if we can't do it in one day, we probably can't do it at all. And we'd rather spend our last hours with our families than chasing false hope. She walked out of the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. Behind her, Aide approached the Arbiter. Why did you agree? This is a waste of time. The High Arbiter watched the small human disappear through the massive doors. Because I have read their history. I have studied what they have done to themselves and to their world. They are a violent species, a chaotic species. They have nearly destroyed themselves a dozen times. He paused. But they never have. Somehow, against all logic, against all probability, they always survive. They always find a way. His crystal form chimed softly. I want to see what happens when a species like that has nothing left to lose. The message reached Earth at 3:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. It arrived on every screen, every phone, every device capable of receiving a signal. There was no warning. There was no filter. The governments of the world had decided, in a moment of rare unity, that humanity deserved to know the truth. 8 billion people learned at the same moment that they had 72 hours to live. For 60 minutes, the world held its breath. In New York, people stood on the streets and stared at the sky, as if they could already see the darkness coming. In Tokyo, trains stopped running as drivers and passengers alike sat frozen, reading the message again and again. In Lagos, a mother held her children close and whispered prayers in a language older than the city around her. In Moscow, an old soldier who had survived 3 wars sat down heavily and wept for the first time in 50 years. 1 hour of silence, 1 hour of shock, 1 hour in which humanity faced the end of everything and did not know what to do. And then something changed. It started small. A physicist in Geneva named received an email from a colleague in Beijing. The email contained a theory, a wild, half-formed idea about the nature of the void swarm. Doctor read it, frowned, and sent back a question. Within minutes, 3 more scientists had joined the conversation. Within an hour, the thread had grown to include 17 universities across 12 countries. In Mumbai, a 13-year-old girl named sat in her bedroom and watched the video feeds of the void swarm that the Galactic Council had released. Other children her age were crying, was thinking. She had always been good at patterns, at seeing things that others missed. And she saw something in the way the swarm moved, a rhythm that reminded her of something she had read in her father's old physics textbooks. She recorded a video explaining her idea. Her English was not perfect. Her equipment was just a cheap phone. But her theory was solid, and when she posted it online, it spread like fire. Two artificial intelligence research teams had been rivals for almost a decade. They had competed for grants, for recognition, for the right to call themselves the best in the world. When the news came, they spent 30 minutes in separate meetings, arguing about what to do. Then the leader of one team picked up the phone and called the other. "We're coming over," she said. "We're bringing our source code, all of it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "We'll put on coffee." All around the world, the same scene repeated itself in different forms. Enemies became allies. Secrets were shared. Walls that had stood for generations came down in minutes. The governments did what governments do. They argued. They debated. They worried about security and protocol and who would be in charge. But the people did not wait for permission. Scientists shared their research openly. Engineers posted their designs for anyone to use. A retired professor in Norway who had spent 40 years studying deep-sea creatures realized that the swarm's movement patterns matched certain organisms in Earth's own oceans, and she uploaded her entire life's work to a public server. By hour 4, someone had created a network. They called it Project Lighthouse. It connected every research institution, every university, every amateur scientist with an internet connection into a single collaborative system. The processing power of every available computer on Earth was linked together. The combined knowledge of human civilization was made available to anyone who wanted to help. The Galactic Council watched from their observation posts, and they did not understand what they were seeing. "Where are the riots?" the delegate asked. "Where is the violence? When they learned of their extinction, they destroyed themselves before the swarm could reach them. When they faced the same fate, they turned on each other in their final days." The delegate chimed in confusion. "These humans should be panicking. They should be hoarding resources, fighting for places on the evacuation ships. Instead they are sharing, cooperating. This makes no sense." High Arbiter stood apart from the others, watching the feeds from Earth with ancient eyes. He saw a construction worker in Detroit teaching an engineer in Jakarta how to weld through a holographic display. He saw a grandmother in Tennessee uploading her dead husband's research papers, work that had been mocked and ignored for 40 years, now being read by thousands. He saw a street vendor in Cairo closing his shop early so he could help translate documents from Arabic to English. "They are not preparing to die," he said softly. "Then what are they doing?" his aide asked. "They are preparing to fight, but not with weapons." His crystal form pulsed with something that might have been wonder, with their minds, all of them together. In Geneva, Doctor had not slept in 20 hours. Her inbox contained over 30,000 messages, each one a theory, a question, a piece of the puzzle. Her team had grown from 6 people to 6,000, scattered across every continent, connected by nothing more than internet signals and desperate hope. They had a name for their goal now. They were going to find the swarm's weakness. Not fight it, not run from it, but understand it. "Every problem has a solution," told her team during a global video call. "We just have to find it. We have the greatest minds in human history working on this. We have more computing power than any species in the galaxy has ever assembled. We have something that no one else has ever tried." "What's that?" someone asked. Smiled, exhaustion and determination mixing on her face. "We have 8 billion people who refuse to accept that this is impossible. 8 billion people who looked at the end of the world and said no. Not today. Not ever." By hour 6, the network was complete. Project Lighthouse was online, and humanity had begun to do what it did best. Not think as individuals, but think as one. The little girl in Mumbai found herself in a video conference with 3 Nobel Prize winners and the head of the European Space Agency. They were not talking down to her. They were listening. Her theory about the swarm's resonance frequency had matched data that the adults had been struggling to interpret for hours. "You might have just saved us all. one of the scientists told her. Shook her head. I just saw a pattern. Everyone else will do the hard work. Across the world, in laboratories and living rooms, in universities and coffee shops, humanity was waking up, not as nations, not as rivals, not as strangers. As one species facing one threat, with one chance to survive. The countdown continued. 66 hours remained until the swarm arrived. But for the first time in galactic history, a species was not running. It was thinking, and thinking, and thinking. And the universe had never seen anything quite like it. The breakthroughs came like lightning strikes, one after another, each one building on the last. It started with the retired marine biologist in Norway, Dr. She was 74 years old and had spent her entire career studying creatures that lived in the deepest, darkest parts of Earth's oceans. When she saw the void swarm's movement patterns, something clicked in her mind. It moves like a wounded animal, she wrote in her upload to Project Lighthouse. Not hunting, not attacking, it moves like something in pain. In Tokyo, a team of quantum physicists read her observation and immediately began running new calculations. They cross-referenced the swarm's energy signature with known patterns of spacetime distortion. By hour 8, they had found something that made them stop and stare at their screens in disbelief. In Lagos, a mathematician named Doctor was doing what she did best. She was looking for patterns. The Galactic Council had provided 100,000 years of data on the void swarm's movements, and everyone else had been looking at the big picture. Doctor looked at the small details. At hour 9, she found it. A tiny irregularity in the swarm's energy signature, a fluctuation that repeated every 7.3 seconds. It was so small that every other civilization had dismissed it as noise. But Doctor knew that noise was just a pattern that had not been understood yet. She uploaded her findings. Within 30 minutes, teams on 4 continents were analyzing the fluctuation. Within an hour, they had connected it to the data from Tokyo and Oslo. At hour 10, Doctor called an emergency global conference. Over 50,000 scientists joined the call. Many more listened through secondary feeds. The entire planet was watching. "We have an answer," said. Her voice was shaking, but not from fear, from excitement, from the wild, impossible hope that had taken root in her chest and refused to die. "The void swarm is not what we thought it was." She shared her screen, and a simulation appeared. It showed the fabric of spacetime itself, the invisible structure that held the universe together. "Look here," she said, pointing to a spot in the simulation. "This is what normal spacetime looks like, smooth, continuous, stable." She pressed a button and the image changed. Now there was a tear in the fabric, a wound. Darkness poured out of it like blood from a cut. "This is the void swarm. It's not a creature. It's not a weapon. It's not an enemy." She took a breath. "It's a wound in the universe itself, a tear in the fabric of reality." The conference call exploded with questions. Held up her hand. "The swarm consumes stars because it's trying to heal itself. It needs energy to close the wound. But the process is inefficient. It can never gather enough energy fast enough. So it keeps spreading, keeps consuming, keeps trying to heal and failing." She paused, letting the implications sink in. Every civilization before us saw the swarm as a predator, something to run from or fight against. But you don't fight a wound. You don't run from an injury. You heal it. A voice came through the conference system. It belonged to an astronomer in Chile. "How? How do we heal a tear in spacetime?" "That's the question," admitted. "We know what the swarm is now. We don't know how to fix it yet." For the next 2 hours, the debate raged. 100 different theories were proposed. Some were brilliant. Some were ridiculous. Some were impossible. A physicist in Berlin named Dr. Hans Weber grew so frustrated that he threw his coffee mug at his holographic display. The mug passed through the light and shattered against the wall. "We're thinking about this wrong," he shouted. We keep trying to close the wound from the outside, but you can't stitch a cut without thread. We need to give it something. Energy. Massive amounts of energy delivered directly to the center of the tear. How much energy? Someone asked. Weber ran the numbers. His face went pale. Approximately the output of a medium-sized star, delivered in a single burst. The conference fell silent. That was impossible. No technology could generate that much energy. No ship could carry it. The mathematics simply did not work. At hour 12, hope began to fade. They understood the problem now, but understanding a problem and solving it were two very different things. They had understood black holes for 10,000 years before they learned to manipulate one. Humans did not have 10,000 years. They had hours. Then at hour 14, a graduate student in Seoul raised her hand. Her name was Won Park. She was 22 years old. She had not slept in 31 hours. Her thesis advisor had told her repeatedly that her ideas were too wild, too impractical, too far outside the boundaries of accepted physics. But there were no boundaries anymore, not today. What if we don't need to generate the energy? She asked. Her voice was quiet and people had to strain to hear her. What if we don't need to carry it? Explain, Doctor said. One shared her screen. It showed a diagram that made several of the older physicists gasp. Spatial folding, she said. We don't move the energy to the wound. We fold space so that the energy source is already there. We take a star, a real star, and we bend spacetime so that for one instant the star and the wound occupy the same point. That's impossible, someone said automatically. Is it? One asked. The council species can fold space for travel. They've been doing it for. This is just the same principle, applied differently. Applied to weaponize a star, the astronomer from Chile said slowly. Or in this case, to use a star as medicine. The debate erupted again, but this time it was different. This time, there was hope in the voices. People were not arguing about whether the idea could work. They were arguing about how to make it work. By hour 16, they had a theoretical framework. It was held together with mathematical duct tape and desperate optimism. Every conventional model said it was impossible. But humans had never been very good at listening to conventional models. Doctor called Ambassador. We have something, she said. I don't know if it will work, but it's a chance. How big of a chance? Hesitated. Honestly, I have no idea. We're doing physics that has never been done before. We're building on theories that were considered science fiction this morning. We might save the world. We might do nothing. We might accidentally tear another hole in spacetime. There was a pause on the line, then laughed. It was not a happy laugh exactly, but it was human. Tell me what you need, she said. Whatever it is, you'll have it. 8 hours remained until the deadline, and humanity had a plan. Now they just needed to build the impossible. Building the device required everything humanity had. The plans were distributed instantly through Project Lighthouse. Factories on 6 continents received their instructions at the same moment. There was no time for meetings, no time for approvals, no time for the usual slow dance of bureaucracy and caution. In Mongolia, miners who had been sleeping were woken by emergency sirens. They were told that certain rare earth elements were needed immediately. Not tomorrow, not in an hour, now. The miners did not ask questions. They grabbed their equipment and went to work. In Silicon Valley, rival technology companies opened their doors to each other for the first time in their histories. Engineers who had spent years guarding secrets now shared everything. Quantum processors that had been locked in development hell for years were pulled from storage and rushed to assembly points. In Germany, precision manufacturing plants switched their production lines. They had been making car parts that morning. Now they were making components for a device that would fold spacetime itself. The workers did not fully understand what they were building. They only knew that it mattered. The assembly was happening in 12 locations simultaneously. Each site built a piece of the puzzle. Some pieces were the size of a fingernail. Others were larger than buses. All of them had to be perfect. There was no margin for error. There was no time for second chances. In Nigeria, a teenager named Emmanuel Obi sat in his bedroom and wrote code. He had taught himself programming from pirated textbooks and free online courses. He had never been to university. He had never worked for a technology company. But when he saw the problem that the engineers were facing, he knew he could solve it. The assembly protocols needed optimization. The current code would take too long to execute. Emmanuel rewrote the entire system in 4 hours. When he uploaded his work to Project Lighthouse, the senior engineers could not believe what they were seeing. "Who wrote this?" one of them demanded. "Some kid in Lagos," came the answer. "He's 17. The engineer shook his head in amazement. "It's better than anything we have. Use it." In Tennessee, a woman named Ruth Cooper sat in her attic, going through boxes she had not opened in 20 years. Her husband Harold had been a physicist, a brilliant one, according to some, a crackpot, according to others. He had spent 40 years working on theories about spatial folding that everyone said were impossible. Harold had died 8 years ago, still believing in his work, still convinced that someday someone would prove him right. Ruth found his notebooks, hundreds of pages of equations in his careful handwriting. She photographed every page and uploaded them to Project Lighthouse. An hour later, her phone rang. It was a woman from Switzerland, calling to tell her that Harold's equations were now the foundation of the device's calibration system. His work, mocked and ignored for decades, was going to help save the world. Ruth sat down and cried, but they were not sad tears. The Galactic Council had stopped laughing. High Arbiter stood before the observation feeds, watching the chaos of human activity with something approaching awe. He had witnessed the deaths of 17 civilizations. He had seen species face extinction with dignity, with despair, with rage. He had never seen anything like this. "They should not be able to do this," the delegate said. "This level of coordination is impossible for a species of their age. They have no hive mind, no telepathic network. They do not even have unified government. And yet they move as one," observed. On the screens, a construction worker in Detroit was learning precision welding techniques from an engineer in Jakarta. They had never met. They did not speak the same language. A real-time translation system converted their words, but something else was converting their intentions, something that did not need words. In Cairo, a street vendor who had closed his shop to help with the effort was now directing traffic flow at a critical assembly site. He had no training for this, but he had spent 30 years managing the chaos of a busy marketplace, and it turned out that the skills were the same. In Mumbai, Young had not slept since her video went viral. She was now part of a team working on the device's targeting system. The adults treated her as an equal. In this moment, there was no age, no rank, no hierarchy. There was only the work. By hour 20, the device was half built. By hour 22, the separate pieces were being loaded onto transport ships and rushed to a central assembly point in orbit above Earth. And then they hit the problem that everyone had been dreading. The device would work. They were almost certain of that now. The physics was sound. The engineering was solid, but someone had to deliver it. The device needed to be activated at the exact center of the void swarm. It needed to be positioned precisely, calibrated in real time, and triggered at exactly the right moment. This could not be done remotely. The swarm's energy field would block all communications. Someone had to fly into the heart of the darkness. Someone had to be there when the device activated. And when it did, the burst of energy would vaporize everything within 100 kilometers. It was a one-way trip. The pilot would not survive. Doctor made the announcement to the global network. She did not sugarcoat it. She did not offer false hope. She simply explained what was needed and asked for volunteers. 12,000 people responded in the first 10 minutes. Scientists, soldiers, teachers, mechanics, a retired nurse from Canada, a teenage pilot from Argentina, a grandmother from Japan who had flown cargo ships for 40 years. They all understood what they were offering. They all typed the same message: I will go. The selection committee was formed quickly. They had criteria. The pilot needed flight experience. They needed steady nerves. They needed to be able to make quick decisions in impossible circumstances. But in the end, the choice was not made by committee. It was made by a 63-year-old cargo pilot from Ohio named had spent his career hauling freight between Earth and the orbital stations. It was not glamorous work. It was not heroic. It was just a job, and he had done it well for 30 years. His wife Sarah had died of cancer 5 years ago. They had never had children. His parents were gone. He had a sister in Phoenix and a nephew he had not seen in 3 years. When the call for volunteers went out, was sitting in his small apartment, watching the news feeds like everyone else. He thought about his life. He thought about all the years he had spent doing ordinary things, being an ordinary man, leaving no mark on the world. Then he stood up and walked to his computer. His application was simple. It said, "I'm a good pilot. I have no one waiting for me. Let me do something that matters." The selection committee reviewed his record. His flight scores were above average but not exceptional. His psych evaluation showed a man who was calm, steady, and unremarkable. But it was his final interview that decided things. "Why you?" they asked. 12,000 people volunteered. Many of them are younger, stronger, more decorated. Why should we choose you? Looked into the camera. He was not an eloquent man. He had never been good with words. "Because someone has to," he said simply. "And I've had a good life. Not an exciting one, not an important one, but good. Sarah and I were happy. I did honest work. I never hurt anyone." He paused. "Let me make it mean something. Let me be the reason someone else gets to grow old, gets to fall in love, gets to watch their grandkids take their first steps." The committee was silent. "Besides," added, and a small smile crossed his weathered face, "I've always wanted to see what's at the center of one of those things. Call it curiosity." 2 hours later, he was boarding the ship. The device was loaded. The coordinates were set. The entire planet watched as the small vessel rose from the assembly platform and pointed itself toward the darkness that was coming to consume them all. Captain opened a communication channel to Earth. "Tell them I wasn't afraid," he said. "Tell them I was proud. And tell my sister I'm sorry I missed her birthday." He closed the channel and engaged the engines. The clock showed hour 23. 1 hour remained. The ship was small. It was not designed for combat or exploration. It was a cargo vessel built for hauling freight between ordinary places. Now it flew towards something that had destroyed civilizations. Captain sat alone in the cockpit, watching the void swarm grow larger in his. It was the darkest thing he had ever seen. Not black like space, which was full of distant stars and the soft glow of galaxies. This was darkness that swallowed light, darkness that seemed to reach toward him with hungry fingers. He should have been afraid. He had expected to be afraid. Instead, he felt something strange. Peace. A kind of quiet certainty that this was exactly where he was supposed to be. His communication system crackled. "Captain, this is Mission Control. You are approaching the outer boundary of the swarm. Communications will be lost in approximately 4 minutes. Copy that, Mission Control." Checked his instruments one more time. The device was secure. The activation sequence was ready. Everything was exactly as it should be. "Captain, we want you to know," the voice on the other end hesitated. "We want you to know that the whole world is watching. Everyone, every person on Earth. They're all with you right now." Smiled. He thought of all those people. the scientists who had worked without sleep, the factory workers who had built the impossible, the little girl in Mumbai who had seen a pattern that started everything, the grandmother in Tennessee whose dead husband's work was now guiding his path. "Tell them I said thank you," he said. "Tell them I'm proud to be one of them." "We will, Captain. Good luck." "Don't need luck," said. "I've got 8 billion people backing me up. That's better than luck." The communication line went silent. He was alone now. Just him, his ship, and the endless darkness ahead. On Earth, the world held its breath. In Geneva, Doctor sat in her control room, surrounded by screens showing data she could no longer interpret. The swarm's interference had cut off their ability to track the ship. All they could do was wait. In Mumbai, sat with her family, her mother's arms wrapped around her shoulders. She had done her part. Now she could only hope it was enough. In Seoul, one park stood at her window, looking up at the sky. Somewhere out there, her theory was being tested. Her impossible idea was being put to use. If it worked, billions would live. If it failed, she would die with everyone else, knowing she had tried. In Tokyo, in Lagos, in Sydney and London and 1,000 other cities, people gathered in streets and homes and public squares. They did not know each other. They came from different cultures, spoke different languages, believed in different things. But in this moment, they were all the same. They were all human. They were all hopping. High Arbiter stood in the council observation chamber, alone. He had sent his aides away. He wanted to witness this moment by himself. In his 6,000 years of life, he had seen many things. He had seen the rise and fall of empires. He had seen stars born and die. He had seen 17 species face the void swarm and lose. Now he watched a single human pilot fly into the darkness, armed with nothing but a device built in 24 hours by a species that should not have been able to build it. The humans had surprised him. They had surprised everyone. Even if they failed, he knew he would remember this moment for whatever remained to him. Inside the swarm flew blind. His sensors were useless. His instruments showed nothing but static. He was navigating by mathematics now, following a course that had been calculated by the greatest minds on Earth. He had to trust them. He had no other choice. The darkness pressed against his like something alive. He could feel it somehow, even through the hull of his ship. It was not evil, he realized. It was not malicious. It was just hurt, wounded, trying desperately to heal itself and failing. "I'm coming to help," he said quietly, knowing no one could hear him. "Just hold on a little longer." At hour 23, Mark 58, his navigation system beeped. He had reached the center. Took a deep breath. He thought about Sarah. He thought about how she had always believed he would do something important someday. He had laughed at her then. He was just a cargo pilot. Ordinary, unremarkable. Maybe she had known something he had not. "This is for you," he whispered, "for everyone." He opened a final transmission, knowing it would take hours to reach Earth, if it reached at all. "This is Captain. I'm at the center. The device is ready." He paused, searching for the right words, his last words. "Tell them we tried. Tell them we never stopped trying. Tell them that being human means never giving up, even when everything says you should." He laughed softly. "And tell them I want a statue, a big one, really tall, with a good likeness." He reached for the activation switch. "Goodbye, Earth, I love you all." At hour 24, Mark 0, Captain pressed the button. For one eternal moment, nothing happened. Then the universe screamed. Energy poured from the device in a burst brighter than creation itself. A star's worth of power, folded through space, delivered in a single instant to the wound that had plagued the cosmos for longer than human civilization had existed. The void swarm shuddered. It convulsed. For a terrible moment it seemed to grow larger, darker, hungrier. And then it began to heal. The darkness retreated. Stars that had been dying stabilized. The wound in spacetime, the tear that had been spreading and consuming for 100, finally received what it had always needed. Enough energy to close. Enough power to heal. Across the galaxy, observers watched in stunned silence as the impossible happened. The void swarm collapsed inward, folding in on itself, shrinking from light years of devastation to a single point. The darkness receded like a tide going out. And when it was over, where the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known once spread across the void, there was only empty space. Empty except for one thing. A new star burned where the wound had been, born from the healing of reality itself, a light where there had been only darkness. In the Galactic Council chamber, High Arbiter stared at the readings and could not speak. The void swarm was gone, not defeated, not fled, healed. The wound was closed, the universe was safe. And a species that had been spacefaring for less than a century had done what no one else had managed in 100,000 years. On Earth, the celebrations began slowly. People were afraid to believe it at first. After so many hours of fear and desperate work, they could not quite accept that it was over, that they were going to live. But as the news confirmed what had happened, as the readings showed the swarm disappearing and the new star being born, the joy spread like wildfire. Strangers hugged in the streets. Families held each other and wept. The world erupted in a celebration unlike any in human history. In Geneva, Doctor collapsed into a chair and laughed until she cried. In Mumbai, Young was lifted onto her father's shoulders while her neighborhood cheered. In Lagos, Doctor stood quietly at her window, watching the sunrise, knowing that there would be many more sunrises to come. A week later, Ambassador returned to the Galactic Council chamber. The same 12 species watched her from their platforms, but something had changed. They did not look down at her anymore. High Arbiter descended from his platform to stand before her. It was an honor he had not shown to any representative in 3,000 years. How, he asked simply. Thought for a long moment before answering. We are not the strongest species, she said, or the oldest. We are not the fastest or the most advanced. We know this. We have always known this. She looked at the display showing the new star burning in the distance. They had named its light. But we have learned, over our short and violent history, that there is nothing we cannot accomplish when we work together. When we decide that failure is not an option. When we look at the impossible and say, yes, but have we tried? She smiled. You gave us 24 hours, Arbiter. If you had given us a week, we might have cured death itself. Was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. There was something new in it, something that had not been there before. Fear and hope in equal measure. I believe you, he said. He looked around at his fellow council members. The ancient species who had governed the galaxy for longer than humanity had existed. I believe, said, that we have much to learn from our new friends. Far away, in the cold of space, where the void swarm had once spread death and darkness, light burned steady and bright, a monument to a cargo pilot who had never considered himself special, a reminder that ordinary people could do extraordinary things, and a promise that as long as humanity existed, as long as they could reach for each other across the distances that separated them, nothing in the universe would ever be truly impossible. The end.